Hi, everyone. My name's Yalda, and I'm part of Autark, and we are part of the Aragon network. And the talk I'm giving today is 7 Principles of Human Work DAOs. So I guess first we can start with what is a DAO, and this is just not a DAO like a blockchain, but more as an organization of humans. It's usually one that operates based on rules which are encoded in smart contracts that are on top of a blockchain. What is a cooperative? A cooperative is an autonomous association of persons that are united, voluntarily over a common goal, and they're part of an organization that's jointly owned and democratically controlled. Are all DAOs cooperatives? This is actually something that has been recently been discussed on Twitter lately. Is someone, Hugh Karp, was like, we should rename DAOs to digital cooperatives. And then there was a response, it's more like a digital plutocracies. So my answer is no, all DAOs are not cooperatives. But what is a human work DAO? A human work DAO is a cooperative organization that operates based on rules which are encoded in smart contracts that run on a blockchain. So I think it's important to understand that a DAO is just like a corporation that operates on a digital jurisdiction. Just like corporations of today, there are many flavors of them, so you also have many flavors of a DAO. So the 7 principles. The Rochdale principles, they're a set of ideals that were established for cooperatives in 1844 in England. And through this presentation, I'm going to show you the similarities between the ideals set forth in 1844 and how they're very similar to what's going on with cooperative DAOs today. Okay, so the first principle is voluntary and open membership. Essentially, cooperatives are voluntary organizations open to all persons that are able to use their services or contribute to the organization and accept the responsibilities of membership. Okay, and then DAOs, or human work DAOs. They have permissionless membership. Usually in our open source world, you create a pull request, and then if you can start to collect tokens, and these tokens that you're earning, kind of like you build up your membership through that. And then, so for cooperatives, it's a democratic member control. So it's one person, one vote typically for cooperatives, at least based on these principles. And people in the cooperative, it's not always flat. You can use your voting power to also elect committees, representatives that can have authority over specific types of decisions like financial planning. But the members still always have that control to elect new representatives, et cetera. Okay, so for DAOs, it's like more like, or for human work DAOs, it's working member control. There's actually a part of like a recent tweet debate. Anya Bly was like, not all cooperatives are one person, one vote. And I was starting to search this more, and because I thought that they all were too, but actually for agricultural cooperatives, there is precedent for the voting to be based more on patronage. And for cooperatives, patronage is usually like your sweat equity, how much time or resources you're putting into the cooperative. And that translates to some of the DAO governance models today, like the systems that Colony is building where you're earning tokens for completing tasks. And that's also similar to some apps that we'll be building into Aragon as part of the planning suite. So for a DAO, a human work DAO, it's self-governed by its members. They set the policies. They decide how votes are weighted. It's like the people that are contributing to the actual work of the DAO. And they can also define like if there is hierarchy in their DAO or not. Okay, so for cooperatives, the third principle is member economic participation. So in cooperatives, usually members contribute equitably, like they all contribute the same amount of capital, and it's because of that equal contribution of capital that they have one person, one vote, and that the incentives are aligned and someone doesn't feel like they should have more voting power. It's like this is a basic principle of cooperatives. And if someone does put in more capital, usually it is treated more like a debt or a loan, not because you put in more capital, you're going to get more of a financial return, because that also like starts to break the game theory of cooperatives. But for DAOs and human work DAOs, this is where you can start to evolve things a little bit, because The problem with cooperatives is they are more difficult to bootstrap. So if you're trying to kind of compete or exist in the tech world with other like more well-funded organizations, you have to try to maybe think, okay, how can we have this more like cooperative model in the 2019, but like maybe tweak a few things so you can bootstrap a human work DAO more easily. So that was just like a recent article actually about crypto networks and cooperatives, and there's like that quote from Jesse Walden there. But essentially, due to this this limitation, it's like what you can do with human work DAOs is make them more multi-stakeholder organizations where the members, the working members can still have control, but since you have a lot more freedom and room to experiment with governance models, you can start to have people that will contribute financially, and they can get revenue in return, or you can say, okay, the working members are still going to have like 50% of the voting power, like one person, one vote, or based on patronage. And then you can say the people that are financing or helping finance, they can have like another aspect of voting power. So it's not like you're completely controlled by your investors, but you can start to come up with these negotiations to invent new models for how a human work DAO can evolve on the cooperative model. So then the fourth principle is autonomy and independence. This is it's very similar to what a principle would be for human work DAOs as well. But essentially, cooperatives are autonomous self-help organizations. They're controlled by their members, and if they enter into agreements with other organizations, they always do so on terms that ensure democratic control of their members. So like as I was saying before, there really isn't that much room in cooperatives to upgrade, to change your voting power. But due to DAOs, you can have autonomy to upgrade your governance. So as I was giving the example before is, you can, if you're an Aragon DAO, you have like your permissions app, you can start to define other stakeholders in the network and give them privileges to do, to execute on specific like bylaws or actions. All right, I feel like I'm going through this really quick. So then the fifth principle is education, training, and information. It's like, yeah, this is actually a cooperative principle. Cooperatives want to provide education and training for their members, and they also, because like the purpose as far as like how a cooperative goes is you want to train people so people can hold many different hats in the organization. Cooperatives typically don't want these like central points of failure where one person or like a few people are holding on to a specific aspect of knowledge for how to do that specific task. So that's why training and education and making people like more multi-skilled is an important aspect of cooperatives. And I think you can also see this in the open source community of which DAOs live, of open knowledge and training by practice, whether it's you put up tasks in GitHub, people do the work there, you provide review to them, like people are learning through more of this like apprenticeship program, and it's actually much more open than cooperatives, because cooperatives they're not as like they're not all existing in this open source world where you're contributing to the tasks and earning, but this is where a human work DAO, there is more room for people to, just grow the network beyond traditional structures because it's more open. And then the sixth principle of a cooperative movement was cooperation among cooperatives. Essentially, it says that cooperatives serve their members most effectively, and they strengthen the cooperative movement by working together through like local, national, and international structures. And we can start to see that in the DAO world as well, especially if you all subscribe, if all DAOs are part of the Ethereum blockchain, for example, or if we just focus on one blockchain. Due to subscribing to that blockchain, you're making your organization more flexible for cooperation with other organizations in the network because you're part of this new digital jurisdiction, you're using code that subscribes to these same rules, so by nature, human work DAOs are built to built to cooperate with other DAOs. And then I guess it's also like if you choose your DAO platform, like if you go with Aragon or DAO Stack, you're also more likely to cooperate with DAOs in that network as well. It's like the way that those systems are built is they encourage the collaboration between the other DAOs. So I think it will definitely be interesting to see the bridges between the different DAOs, like if there will be ones that start to form or not. But I think that that this is also like a very interesting principle, is how similar this is to the principles of the past as well. And then another, the seventh principle essentially of a cooperative movement was cooperatives work for the sustainable development of their communities through policies approved by their members, so it's concern for community. I think we can say that it's probably a lot of people in the Ethereum community feel the same way. But it's like, why, like we still have to like kind of take it to the next level, because whenever you're building a DAO, it's like, okay, well, why don't we just build like a traditional cooperative in the real world using like the existing legal structures? It's like, if you do that, you don't have as much freedom as building it as a DAO, because you start to become constrained with the laws of the state or country in which you incorporate. But if you kind of exist as a DAO, you do have more freedom. So not only are you concerned for your community, the people you're working with, but you're actually contributing to technologies that allow you to cooperate in a manner that is kind of more in tune with how we might, it's like cooperate without limitations of that jurisdiction, invent new models for cooperation. Okay, so basically that was the rundown between the 7 principles of cooperatives and how we can redefine those for the 7 principles of human work DAOs. And I think I think what's fascinating about DAOs today is a lot of people are building them, and they're inventing these models that are very similar to cooperative models, and they actually didn't know about cooperatives before. I'm part of Space Cooperative, an actual California cooperative corporation, like we incorporated 2.5 years ago. I also have a Swiss association that we're about to establish called the Space Decentral Association, and a Wyoming LLC, and I'm part of a DAO. So it's like over the past 3 years, it's like I feel like I've learned so much about different entities, and you learn about the restrictions of them, and I think it's fascinating about what's about to happen with DAOs, because like having traditional corporations is not so fun. It's like really confusing. Like for example, for our LLC, it's like there are 2 foreign members, and it's like, oh, if you're a foreign member, you have to hold back 35% for taxes, even though you're not like working in the United States. There's like all of this stuff that we have to, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. It's like you don't even live in the United States, and we have to withhold taxes. So I think that what's going to be fascinating with this world of human work DAOs is really, truly building these digital jurisdictions and figuring out how we can like evolve out of them, so we don't have to kind of like be restricted with the traditional corporate models. So that's basically the end of my presentation. It was pretty short, but if people have questions, let me know.
Do you see any like new principles with DAOs that aren't really present in cooperatives, that we're doing something new that is maybe additive to those first 7 principles?
I think that there are definitely, yes. I think a lot of it is more about like how the governance will be quite different. So you might have to introduce different types of principles. For example, you can have human work DAOs that are still permissioned, like they're not permissionless. Even for cooperatives, there are different types of cooperatives, like there are worker-owned cooperatives, or where the people that are working as part of the cooperative, they're also like benefiting from the work and the labor and like equally sharing the revenue. Or there are consumer cooperatives where it's more like, you know, you go to REI or the grocery store and you purchase something, and as you're a member of that cooperative, you get like some dividends as part of it. So I think that like the principles, they are quite different for different types of cooperatives. So you also have different principles for different types of DAOs. Like for example, voluntary and open membership, that's usually probably something more in tune with like a consumer cooperative. But for worker-owned cooperatives, you probably, you still want to go through an application process sometimes to admit the worker. So I think that will also happen with like human work DAOs as well. It's not always going to be completely permissionless. And then I think the other interesting thing will be how like dispute resolution fits into these more like permissionless networks. Because that's also something that hasn't really existed before for cooperatives, where you would want to resolve your disputes outside of your organization. But if it is a permissionless network, you do want probably like more of a third party to resolve those disputes. So it's like that can also be some sort of principle or governance model. Yeah.
To execute the vision as you kind of see it, is there missing pieces left in the ecosystem, or like what, or if there is any, what would those be?
Yes. Basically, I think that, let me just have it on that slide. So the work that we are doing as part of Autark, we're developing a planning suite, which has a lot of different tools. So a lot of it has to do with the task management system of a DAO. For a human work DAO, that is the major component that you need, is like people completing the work, people you know, gaining like non-transferable type tokens. I know that there's like a lot of debate that you can't have fully non-transferable tokens, but still you need something like that for a human work DAO, because for cooperatives you can't transfer your membership. That is something like in the cooperative principles, all the bylaws of any cooperative is you can't transfer your membership. So if we want a human work DAO that resembles that, you can't really have people transferring the reputation they're earning. So I think that, you know, figuring out how that can work will be very important. So that's the main thing. And then the other thing, it's like another application that we'll be building is a rewards application. Like how do you, if you have like surplus, how do you distribute that to your workers? So for cooperatives, it's also, like I said, it's not based on the amount of capital you put in, but essentially the amount of time or sweat equity you put in. So if you're allocating like work tokens based on a task management system, that's like earning patronage in a cooperative. And then usually the profits are distributed at the end of the year after you take care of all the costs. So those are the basic like tools that we need to operate as like a human work DAO, is just like tracking work, being able to see how much each person's like sweat equity is, and then distributing profit based on, or distributing revenue based on what surplus you have. Yeah.
Hi, great talk. My question is, we are now, as the project, making first steps to Fair Data Society DAO. And in the process, in the last few months, there was also, we've been dealing with the idea of cooperatives and how to do it and so. And the decision for now, in the beginning, is actually that we don't bother with incorporation. And this is a little bit of a provocative question now that I have. It's, I wonder if DAOs, the way we envision them, do they need to be incorporated? Moreover, a lot of DAOs have this promise of making big social change. Wouldn't incorporation actually present an attack vector for the existing power structures? What's your view on that?
Wouldn't a corporation say?
A cooperative being incorporated, wouldn't that create an attack vector of the existing power structures? Those who don't want to see the change.
Attack vector from
In
what?
a sense, I mean, okay, it's not a DAO, it's a different case, but when we look at WikiLeaks, for example, in 2010, WikiLeaks was, I mean, they had quite a lot of problems because PayPal, Visa, all those guys, the existing power structures cut them off. And they found refuge in the cryptocurrencies, and they also tanked the ROI. So in a sense, you know, what I'm asking is, if we create a DAO, and we give it a legal form, in form of the cooperative, and that DAO starts making big social changes, does the incorporation as a cooperative present a vulnerability?
Well, I wasn't necessarily saying that like a DAO should have like a cooperative as their, like an actual cooperative corporation as their legal entity. I think that the main reason that people form corporations still today in this DAO world is for, like, you know, liability protection. Like if the network, like if you're participating in this network and you contribute to something that might make someone else lose money, if you're part of like a corporation, and you're being sued, you know, your personal assets aren't at risk. I would say that's the major benefit, right, like today, for why anyone would want to still have a corporation in this DAO world is to protect personal assets. So I think what needs to change for us to get away from actually having these legal entities is for DAOs to somewhat be recognized and to be able to provide that, you know, liability protection to members, unless it's a completely pseudonymous DAO where, you know, no one knows who everyone is, but it's just like a question of like how, if you are trying to like contribute to like, you know, something like positive social change, it's like, okay, are people gonna trust these, this network of anonymous agents? I think it's definitely gonna be interesting to see what happens in the evolution of DAOs, but as long as DAOs are doing friendly things, I think it's, you know, it's probably okay to coexist with legal entities, but I definitely think, you know, I'm biased to say, like, I like the Aragon model where, you know, they are starting to fund multiple entities. It's like you have an association, now you have Aragon 1, and now you have Autark, and then you have like other contractors. I think that is the model that's going to make the most sense for the next few years, where you have like this association that's like their main responsibility is just like sending funds. They're not really doing the work of the network, and then these other entities and contractors are doing the work, and then you start to kind of like DAOify aspects of the projects where you don't really need the entities, and you can fund networks of volunteers. So I think it'll be like kind of like evolutionary like that, where you start to you know, coexist with legal entities, and then you work with people that are individual contributors that aren't part of any of the entities, and then you just kind of like see how things evolve. Yeah. Yeah, so so I'm also part of Space Decentral, and the goal is for Space Decentral to be an Aragon DAO. But right now, I'm more full-time as part of Autark, and we are building applications for Aragon. So one aspect of that, the strategy behind that is we recognize as part of like building Space Decentral that the tools that we need, they're, you know, quite generic to DAOs in general. It's like it will solve Space Decentral's needs, but it will solve other organizations' needs. So we have to essentially build out the roadmap of the planning suite as part of Autark, and then Space Decentral will start to come to life more with the governance model of this like more human work DAO. So yeah, Space Decentral is a human work DAO. The governance is going to be based on people that are participating in the network and completing tasks. So it is inspired by the cooperative model, but it has a few different tweaks. Yeah. All right. Thank you.